This is Self-Care-ish, a podcast where we talk about divorce, dating, choosing not to date, and saying yes to the things you've been scared to indulge in and no in a way that won't get you ostracized by society. The goal for this series is to defy some of the social stigmas and hurdles people face when they make a bold decision, whether it's to leave a relationship, quit a job, or even being brave enough to tell friends and family no when you're at capacity and you need time for you. And who am I? I'm Megan Lonergan. I've been a columnist and copywriter for over a decade, and I'm also a newly separated co-parent. And if there's one thing I love more than anything, it's meeting people where they're at. And where you're at is probably busy, most likely multitasking while you're listening to this. So with no further ado, it's time to get self-care-ish. All right, welcome back to Self-Care-ish, the podcast that says yes to prioritizing yourself and no to being a total douchebag about it. Today is a special episode because it is my first interview for this podcast. And I'm so happy to say that I managed to pin down Dene Logan, who is known as Miss Interdependent on TikTok. She's just one of my favorite TikTok therapists, so I feel super, super fortunate to have her on. And I will leave a timestamp in the show notes if you'd like to cut straight to that chat. But here's a little context of what this episode is all about. So after 3 weeks of covering off divorce, I wanted to dive into a topic that is a little more universal for everybody. This topic is limerence. Not limerence, which my phone seems to want to automate to all the time, and not limerance, like Liberace. It's limerence. And it's the professional name for an involuntary state of romantic infatuation that can result in obsessive thoughts and fantasies about other people. And it can happen to anyone at any stage. Single, married, in a relationship, in a situationship, whatever you're in right now. It's kind of like chlamydia in the sense that it's everywhere and not everyone realizes that they even have it. And I know what you're thinking, right? But Megan, I don't get it. That is just a fancy pants word for a crush. Or isn't that just what falling in love feels like? No, my friend. Limerence is different. Quick history lesson. The term was first coined by psychologist Dorothy Tenov in the early 1970s. So she conducted over 300 interviews with men and women who claimed to be in love. So she wanted to gather qualitative data on the experience of romance. She noted that how limerence is different between love and, say, a more temporary crush or an infatuation is that it's usually when a person finds themselves being drawn to this kind of unfulfilled, intense longing for another person. It's sort of where the person becomes more or less obsessed by someone else and spends much of their time fantasizing about them or imagining how much better their life would be with that person. And they usually ignore all other potential and probably more viable partners in the process. So the part that I find most interesting about this phenomenon is that limerence may only last if the conditions for the attraction leave it unfulfilled. Put simply, it's all about wanting what you can't have. And so what happens is the limerence grows stronger wherever there is occasional intermittent reinforcement that supports the underlying feelings that someone has. So it's kind of like a poker machine. It's the unobtainable nature of the goal that seems almost reachable that ends up making the feeling so powerful. Sounds nuts, right? Okay, let's contextualize it further because I know right now there is someone out there listening to this going, that sounds like simp behavior. I have never had limerence. I am a peacock, but with nicer hair and less feathers. Sure, you might be. But have you ever joked about having a work wife or a work husband or put someone you're not in a relationship with on a pedestal, or even manufactured a social outing in the hopes of running into your love object, or maybe you've read a little too deeply into a friendly text message from someone you find attractive, or have you even had a little Instagram crush, or do you pay for OnlyFans and communicate a little too obsessively with the performer? These are all things that can happen on the limerence spectrum. And if you think really hard, I bet you can find an example of when it's happened on some scale to you. Another factor I find super interesting about this phenomenon is that while true love usually occurs when both parties' cups are full, we all feel balanced, and we're ready to give to another person in a really equal, healthy way. Limerence is usually said to happen when there are either cracks in your primary relationship, or it could be a symptom of relational trauma, like an unhealed attachment wound. Essentially, if you don't be loving life, you be loving limerence instead, as a coping mechanism. So how does this relate to me, a random therapist I found online, and Hollywood actor Russell Crowe? It is a great story. So let me grab a cup of tea and allow me to explain. All right. I really want to cut straight to the Russell Crowe part, but I have to couch this whole thing in context, so bear with me. Now, I'm going to be super vulnerable here. I had a brief encounter with limerence around the end of my marriage. Things were not, you might say, tickety frickin' boo. And if they were, you and I wouldn't be having this strange one-sided conversation. But you don't need to hear all the heavy stuff. Come on. Your life, I know, it's hectic enough. But I promise this is relevant. So I'm willing to put myself in the firing line in the name of a great story. So something my ex and I really pride ourselves on is we've always had pretty great communication, even when things are really tense. So I came to him one day and I said, look, for reasons X, Y, and Z, I'm finding myself lingering a little too long on this person's Instagram. And I don't like this. This is making me uncomfortable. And the best thing I can think of to do is to make a therapy appointment and go and work on this. Now, the reason I said that is because I'm naturally a very super monogamous person. I get very romantic and blinkers on when I'm with someone. So this behavior was very incongruous with my natural bonding style. So he was like, okay, that's good. Okay, you go do you, boo. So I did. I Googled and booked with the first therapist that popped up near me. I remember walking in and I sat down on the couch and I very decisively said, I've read that there's this thing called limerence and I think I might have it because XYZ is going on and it's making me act like this. And it feels stupid and pathetic and I don't like it. Please fix me. And she paused and she said, actually, I've got a story from my own life that might interest you. And my ears pricked up. Mostly because, it's super unusual for a therapist to not just go, how does that make you feel over and over again? Like here was one actually prepared to reveal something personal to me. So my attention was grabbed. And what she told me was fascinating. Mostly because it involved Hollywood heavyweight actor Russell Crowe, but it also launched me on this whole journey of trying to understand this fascinating phenomenon in general. So she said she was married, unhappily. So she separated from her husband, and she found herself fantasizing about Russell Crowe, Gladiator. Like she knew she was meant to be with him, and he just hadn't met her yet. And I asked her the very obvious question, how did you make this connection? I mean, doesn't Russell Crowe seem extremely unattainable on the unobtainable scale? And I'm not saying that because she wasn't on the level. Like she was very externally very beautiful and attractive. And she said to me, no, she had friends of friends that kind of knew him. And we're on the Gold Coast, which is the movie making capital of Australia. So the whole idea wasn't completely far fetched, but just far fetched enough to just be a little out of reach. Anyway, she said this went on for a while, and she would mention it to friends who know him through tangential connections, and she would just generally put it out into the universe, to the point where she eventually did, in fact, end up at a gig with Russell Crowe and a few friends. So don't let anyone tell you you can't make your dream happen, people. So she's in the crowd, and Russell Crowe is next to her, and he makes his move. He puts his arm around her. My eyes were like bulging out of my head at this point. And she said, and I say this with full respect to Russell Crowe, who was probably very lovely and respectful, she said she got the ick. As in, she'd got him, technically. She'd scored him. She could have taken him home that night. And she said all she felt was, ew, gross. And I was like, wait, was he wearing like Lynx Africa or something? Like, what went wrong? This was your dream. And she said, no, it's just that I got what I wanted and I didn't want it anymore. Cue light bulb, lightning, thunder moment, like dramatic crescendo music. It's so interesting, huh? When I think about it, she also told me that on the Gold Coast, there are 9 women for every man. To which I was like, wait a minute, so you're saying that I should stay married just because it might be hard to find another man that's right for me? In hindsight, maybe she wasn't the greatest therapist in the world, but I don't know. I'll always value the insight that she gave me with her little Russell Crowe story. And she's right. It is hard to find a perfect person on the Gold Coast. But that is not a reason to stay in a bad relationship, guys. I'm good. But anyway, this long preamble is the lead up to why I wanted to speak to another expert. So I went to TikTok. Of course, where everyone goes. So the following recording is a chat I had with Dene Logan of @MissInterdependent. It was eye-opening, revelatory, and here it is. Dene Logan, hi. Firstly, massively adore your work. I first discovered you on TikTok, where I fell in love with your very relaxed approach to explaining complex psychological issues. And so everyone who is listening, can you please follow Dene on TikTok? She's at Miss Interdependent, or MS Interdependent, and also on Instagram at Dene.Logan, Dene.Logan. Okay, what I love most about your content is how often you're just sitting on the floor, you're cross-legged, you're talking to someone off camera, and it almost feels like we're in the same room sharing a conversation with you. Why do you think you approached it this way?
Yeah, you know what's so funny, Megan, is a lot of the clips that I post on TikTok are actual clips from retreats that I run. And so I do a lot of facilitating retreats with women and, retreats on topics like codependency and, how we sort of come into a more embodied, empowered sense of self. And so a lot of times they're just little like snippets. We'll film them. And it'll be like conversations that I am actually having with the women or questions that they've asked. And so I find that when I put those clips up, they resonate for obviously a lot of people because we're all connected and we all have really similar things that we're experiencing,
I notice a lot of your content centers around the dating world. Do you think people are getting smarter at dating thanks to TikTok and everything on social media? Or do you think it's just as complicated as ever?
Oof, big question. I mean, I think in a lot of ways, I think that dating can either be more complicated or, well, I think it's complicated for sure, but I think it's complicated because of so many layers of what we believe it is to date someone and to fall in love and ultimately share our lives with someone. I'm predominantly a couples therapist here in LA. And so I sort of work with people when they're in the stage of what happens beyond the happily ever after that we're all sort of conditioned to believe in, and what it means to actually share our lives with someone and attempt to make that work. And everybody, I don't care who you are, none of us get through childhood unscathed and without some things that we're bringing into our partnerships that can frankly make partnering with another person really challenging. And so I think when we're in the dating phase, like, first of all, I think while there's a lot about dating apps and, the ways that we get into the space of actually meeting another person now that can make it like we have a lot more access to a lot more people a lot more quickly. A lot of that can be really overwhelming to our nervous system. A lot of that can be, frankly, a little bit dehumanizing in the way we're just sort of like swiping left and right. One of my friends who's a therapist says it's almost like we're just like shuffling baseball cards. They're not even like human beings anymore. But I think, I was talking to someone the other day about how when you used to like meet someone organically in the wild or at a bar or something, you would really, before you got to the stage of a first date, you would really have like cultivated a flow between the two of you, or you would, have a baseline of like, we're attracted to each other. And that's why we're taking it to this next step, where a lot of times when we've been getting to know someone over text on a dating app now, it's like we're getting to the date and we're like attempting to determine if this is someone I'm attracted to or if there's chemistry here. And it can just feel kind of awkward, and there's a lot more pressure, and there's a lot about it that can just be challenging. But I think it also provides a real opportunity for us to notice what it's bringing up for us and to practice staying with ourselves through all of the anxiety and difficult emotions that come to the surface,
I feel super fortunate to have this very brief time with you, so I want to just cut to the chase. So, Limerence, can you provide your expert breakdown of what you think this phenomenon is and how you feel it differs from, say, having a crush or just regular old falling in love?
Well, it's really interesting, Megan, because I'm certainly aware of the term limerence, and you're going to be, I'm curious to hear what you think of my take on limerence. So a little bit of background on me is that I come from a depth psychology background, which for those of your listeners who don't really know a lot about depth psychology is the psychology of the soul. It's often how it's referred to. It's based on Jungian psychology, and it's a lot more of like a spiritual perspective on the work of, processing and working through our traumas, our pain points, whatever we're working through. But it's sort of like the hero's journey. So whatever the thing is that I'm going through in this moment, it's sort of like we zoom out and look at our life through the big context of our life, and that this is a chapter of my life. And what is this chapter of my life attempting to teach me? Now, I say all this because from what I understand about limerence, it's sort of, like I'm in the state of obsession, and I'm really sort of like unable to put down the idea that this person that I've almost come into an infatuated state with is going to be the person that completes me, right? Here's what I'll say. I think there's a lot about the way that we are culturally conditioned that really supports us being in that type of a space, where I think whoever the person is, what I've come to understand about love and relationships is they are always like a mirror showing us where we are developmentally, whatever we have that's sort of like unprocessed within us that we need to look at and sort of understand about ourselves. So if I think, let's say I fall in love with someone that I've gone on a date or two with, and I'm like in an obsessive state, or what we might call limerence, I think what that is an indication of to me is that I believe that this person in front of me holds something within them that I believe I am lacking within myself. A lot about our culture and like, fairy tales and what I think is often really codependent ways of meeting what it is to fall in love really supports us in believing that, that this person's going to be my other half. And the person who is the one who's meant for me is going to know how to love me in all the ways that I've been longing to be loved forever, right? What I can tell you as a couples therapist is that never the case, because what this person ends up doing is being like what we fall in love with and what we're like really drawn to is normally our subconscious attempting to heal the things that we were wounded by in our childhood. So it's very like it's almost always the case that what I'm most drawn to, like the person that I like feel like I can't live without, has very like reminiscent energetics or qualities of a parent or a caretaker that I was harmed by in some way or that I had the most challenging relationship with. So say I had a mother who was really rejecting of me, right? I will find men who are really present and, men or whoever I'm attracted to, I will find a man who's like really present and really wants to be with me. My subconscious will find him boring, right? I'll be like, I don't know. He's whatever. But a man who rejects me, a man who's like hot and cold and ghosting energy, and I just don't know what, breadcrumbing me or whatever the thing is with him, I'm like, oh, well, he's something, right? Like, some part of me just like has to have him. Now, some might say if I like stay in the space of infatuation and obsession with this man, that's a limerence state. And I would agree, but also I would be curious about like what the layers are underneath that limerence for me to be curious about within myself, which is this man who is rejecting me becomes an invitation for me to really look at the aspects of myself that I'm rejecting. So I believe he holds qualities that are everything I've been longing to have in another person. I would want to be curious about how can I really see those qualities within myself, cultivate those qualities within myself, honor those qualities within myself, and stop feeling like I need to externalize the experience of love through another person. So, if a client came to me in a state of what we would describe as limerence, that would be my work to really validate that, like, yeah, I think this person probably mirrored to you a lot of things that you're hungry to express within yourself, and also some things that you're hungry to heal within yourself from childhood. But can we honor that this person came into your life? Like, I believe all collisions are divine collisions and no one comes to us by accident. It's just like my belief system. But I think I would want to honor this collision and say, what did this person show me through what I felt really attracted to, either that I need to heal or that I really need to look at like building more of those qualities within myself, so I don't believe that I need to look for them in another person. Does that make sense?
In this episode, I kind of open up a little bit on my own experience of limerence in my marriage, which was kind of me lingering a little longer on someone's Instagram and then feeling bad about it and telling my husband and working through that. And I think that's a pretty common issue for people. Should we be torturing ourselves about it?
I think there's a way, Megan, that like our society has really pathologized a lot of like human behavior and made us wrong for that. Like, so what I'm gathering from what you're saying is you were in a marriage that was no longer in alignment for you and you had maybe outgrown and it was time for this marriage to expire. So your psyche started to feel hungry for something else. And so you started to look at other people's accounts and fantasize about what it would be like to be with someone else. Now I can pathologize that and say, oh my God, you were like in the state of obsession. That's like ridiculous behavior. Okay. Or perhaps you felt the pull to something else. I think there's a very linear, right, wrong, good, bad way that we hold so many aspects of our humanity. And I think it makes us feel oftentimes like there's something wrong with us when whatever the thing is, whether it's anxiety or depression or obsessive thoughts, I think there's an invitation underneath whatever we're experiencing to really say, like, why is this coming up for me? What is this attempting to teach me or show me about myself? If I'm feeling a real pull towards someone outside of my marriage, in the way that feels like fantasy, perhaps there's some part of me that is really longing to be expressed that I feel like I haven't had the freedom to express in a really long time. Now I can make myself wrong for that, or I can say, what would it feel like to start tuning into the feelings I feel like I would feel with that person? So say you're looking at some guy's Instagram and you're like, oh, I don't know what he was doing, but he was doing something that like, I imagine myself being with him. And what would it feel like? What would we be doing together? And maybe it'd be like, he'd just be really present, and he would see all of these things within me that I've longed to feel maybe in my marriage that I didn't feel. And he would really be thoughtful of what I wanted to do, and like all of the things that I imagine I would feel in that man's presence, right? Now I can make myself wrong for that, or I can say, yeah, that feels like something I'm really hungry to experience. What if I did more of that for me? What if I really gave myself permission to honor what's coming up for me? What if I really stayed present with myself and said, Megan, what are you hungry for? Like, what do you want to do with your time? Where am I putting myself in a box of what I need to be and need to be doing that's not serving me in some way? And how can I give myself permission to put some of that down and really be a little bit lighter? I think we're just so conditioned to be out of our imaginal space, out of the space of like what I would call like our healthy feminine energy, frankly. And we live in a patriarchal society that just like really says that there's a structured way that things should be done, and if you're not doing it like that, you're doing it wrong. And I just strongly disagree. And I think in a lot of ways it really creates a lot of internal suffering for all of us.
So something we hear about a lot with limerence is often when people obtain their, say, limerent object, or they achieve the score, or they get into a relationship with someone who's avoidant, they often say, oh, I don't actually want them anymore. So what's that all about?
I think it's that thing of there is something about the chase. I think there's so much that I have found about our relationships that are really similar to the cycle of addiction, to be honest. It's like, the hunger for like the ritual, and like the ritual of the chase of it. And then the like, the obtaining of the thing. And then I got the thing in the, and then I like come down from that high, but then I need to feel it again. And so a lot of times if we get the object of whatever the thing is that we're feeling like will give us that dopamine surge or that high, once we have it, there's like a come down, right? So it's like, it wasn't ever about that person, I guess, is the real point of what I'm saying. And I think that's always the case. What I think most of us are taught to believe love is I love you because of how you make me feel, right? I don't think that's love. I think love is I see you in all that you are, and I'm so unbelievably inspired and, you know, um, just feel like I want to be a better version of myself because of who you are, that I want to like rise to meet you in that space. But it's like when we love someone, it's about them. But we're really taught to believe that love is about how this person is experiencing me. But that's about something that we are meant to give ourselves. That's often an attachment wound. And that's often something that I didn't get from a parent or, that original caretaker. And so when I'm wanting someone, like you were saying, for instance, that isn't available, there's something that feels familiar there. I always say, like, if it's hysterical, it's historical, right? If it doesn't make sense, there's something historic. There's something from childhood that is being brought to the surface here. I mean, and that's all of us, It's like some person in my history couldn't show up for me in the way that I longed for them to, couldn't be present with me in the way that I longed for them to. And this feels reminiscent. And what our subconscious does is it says, if this person will love me, then that will mean that I was worthy of love all along. And of course, we were always worthy of love. It was never about us that person couldn't be present with us. But then what ends up happening is once we've gotten that person, it feels like, if you want me now, then there must be something wrong with you because I'm still looking to fill that like high, right? Does that make sense?
Okay, what about if someone gets their limerent object and they decide to stay in a relationship with their limerent desire? What would that kind of look like? How would that play out?
Yeah, it's the dance of the pursuer, distancer, the avoidant, anxious. Like there's a dance. There's a way that we meet one another in polarity, right? So if I'm in the space of anxious energy and I'm really like longing to be with someone who's like more avoidant and more like distancing themselves from me. So I'm the chaser and they're the distancer. The minute the distancer lets me catch them, all of a sudden will create a different sense of polarity. And I'll be like, then I'm the distancer and they're the chaser, right? Like that's just how we're built. It's not conscious until we do that work of bringing ourselves back to ourselves and saying, I am meant to find a sense of wholeness within myself. So then I'm actually able to see and be present with the person in front of me, and I can love them for who they are, not what I believe they are completing within me. So it becomes the minute I have that object of my desire, if I haven't really done the work to feel like I actually don't need anybody outside of me to feel like I'm good, then the minute they want me, I'll be back in that dance of the pursuer distancer, and I won't want them anymore. I'll be off looking for another object to get that hit of dopamine from, you know?
So, simple question. Do you consider limerence a form of cheating?
I don't love to like make those like blanket statements. I think everyone has to decide something like that for themselves. I think same to be said for like, you know, you hear people say about like emotional affairs a lot of times. Now, I think always it's information. You know, I tend to be that couples therapist that just feels like when there's infidelity, there's information there. You know, it's always there's a dance between the two of us that was happening. And can we be curious about like what was going on that we felt drawn to something outside of the relationship? I would think that would be true of limerence as well. So if I'm really feeling a pull to something outside of my partnership, I don't know that I think it's cheating or not. I don't know that I really think it matters that much. It's just, can I be curious about what is this attempting to get me to tune into about my relationship, right? Am I hungry for something with my partner, or hungry to have something with my partner that I'm not experiencing? Am I, you know, just feeling like this relationship is no longer in alignment with who I'm becoming and what I want for myself? And I think we can make ourselves wrong for it, or we can just be really curious about what is this, you know, attempting to get me to tune into. So I would call limerence, to be honest with you, Megan, like I would call it another codependent tendency, meaning I regulate my nervous system with something outside of myself. And we can do that in a number of ways. We can do that through people pleasing. We can do that through you know, just like making our needs smaller. We can do that through attempting to control another person, and we can do that through obsessing with another person. Now, the way that maybe limerence shows up with people that I work with often is like, I am just like using this person as a place to put my thoughts, as a way of distracting myself from whatever I don't want to be present with in my life. Maybe it's a marriage. Maybe it's a job that I don't love. Maybe it's the fact that I don't know what I want to do with my life and I'm really feeling really unsatisfied, right? That can be so many different things. But the thing is, it's like, just like, you know, my friend who I have a podcast with often says one person's Jack and Coke is another person's people pleasing. But it's just like, this is the thing that I do to distract myself. My coping mechanism, my way of self-regulating is through obsession with another person, through distracting myself with thoughts of another person, right? But that's not actually about them. That's about what I'm attempting not to feel within me. So absolutely, I think we can do that while we're married. We can do that while we're single. We can do that, you know, as soon as we get into relationship with someone. And like you were describing, like all of a sudden now I need a new object of desire. But I think it's always, I believe that I need something outside of myself to regulate my nervous system, to control how I'm feeling, to calm myself down, to distract myself with thoughts that make me feel a little bit better. It's a coping mechanism. But from my perspective, all of our codependent tendencies are that. And I often say codependency is the most socially acceptable addiction of them all. It's literally the air we breathe. It's how we're raised. And everyone just thinks it's really okay to be codependent. But what I have found is it really holds us back a lot of times from our personal development when we believe that relationships are the goal. This other person's the holy grail. That's what all my energy should be focused on. But then what am I not developing within myself when that's the entire focus of my world, you know?
Do you mind if I use a real world example just for someone who's listening who might be going through something like this with themselves or with their partner? So, say someone's partner or their husband has come to them and said, "Look, I'm leaving you. I'm in love with my coworker. This is the end." Like a typical limerence situation. What's your advice for that person?
That's a big question. But here's what I would offer. I would want to be very curious about what are the fears that it brings to the surface. For me, if I think about allowing someone who, for whatever reason, is resistant to being present with me, to showing me the love and affection and adoration that he is showing this person that he may be in this limerence connection with, what about me feels afraid of letting that go? What about me feels like that's what I deserve in relationship? Because I think, again, it's always an invitation to bring the focus back to ourselves. Now, is it infatuation? Is he having like a midlife crisis? I don't know. But I think ultimately, what we spend a lot of time doing, from my perspective, is believing that we have the ability to parent other adults. And what I have found is we don't get to be in control of anyone but ourselves in this lifetime. So if my husband were in sort of an infatuated state with another woman, I would want to be curious about why I hold on to that space of resistance, and more saying, are we still in a space that feels authentic and true and life affirming with one another? Or has our relationship shifted in a way that it needs to change form and maybe we need to let go? I don't know. I would maybe suggest getting into some couples therapy if I were to talk to your friend, so we can really have some honest conversations around that. But I think a lot of times we're resistant to letting go of something. And listen, been there. Because we believe, one, it's scary in terms of our abandonment wounds and like I'm scared to be by myself, but also there's something it means about me if someone leaves me or doesn't want to be with me anymore. And that can be the harder thing to look at and sit with. And when that is the case and we sort of deny it and just think we're going to mold this person back into who we feel like they need to be or get them back in alignment with where we want them to be, it's really a form of self-abandonment. Like we're telling our inner child, we're telling the sacred parts of ourselves, you don't matter enough for me to stay with you and really love you through all of the difficult feelings this brings up for you. And I think that's our work, to bring the focus back to me and say, what he's doing, that's for him to be in curiosity about. But I got to be curious about me and why I'm holding on so tightly to something that is really hurting me right now in whatever way it is. You know what I mean?
I just love how open and kind your approach to therapy is. How much would you say your own relationship history has kind of informed your therapy style?
I was married for 11 and a half years. I am no longer married, but, I think that there's so much about what I couldn't see about my relationship until I was outside of my relationship that has really informed the way that I work with couples. I think there's so much about what we are taught about love and relationships that is just so unbelievably adversarial. And it's you and me against each other versus you and me against the problem, which is what I really love to bring couples into the space of. Um, but I think, frankly, there's a lot about the way that we're taught to love that really isn't loving one another very well. I can't tell you how often, speaking heteronormatively in this case, but I will hear women sort of talking about their husbands like they're idiots, or men talking about the ball and chain that is ruining my life. And it's like, do we love this person or is this my arch enemy, right? But it's really culturally normalized. And what I find is it really doesn't lead to a ton of fulfillment. And I think there's something in the phrase like love me well or leave me alone. And how do we get to a space where it's like, I am consciously choosing to be with this person, knowing none of us are entitled to love. There are some people who go through an entire lifetime and never experience having someone to really love. And I think if we hold all of our relationships with a different level of reverence, and that this is a sacred gift to have someone in whatever form that is, and for however long it is. I was married for 11 and a half years, but none of it was wasted. I think, my ex-husband is one of my best friends, and I learned so much about myself in the years that we were together, and I grew so much in that relationship. And there was a point where it was meant to expire. And I think there's just a different level of consciousness that we can bring to our partnerships when we really say we don't own one another. And we have an opportunity to sort of say every relationship I'm in, and if we talk about it in the context of limerence and what we've been talking about, is really an opportunity for me to bring the focus inward and ask myself, like, what is this teaching me about myself?
Okay, you are seriously the most perfect person for interviewing on this particular podcast. what if someone listening wants to book you? Do you take Zoom appointments?
You're so lovely. I don't anymore. I kind of do other things now, and I am at my client max for who I'm taking on, but I do a lot through, the social medias and all of those things to still connect with people. But I have a 6-year-old boy, so he takes up a lot of my time. My days are pretty full.
Well, Dene, Logan, thank you so much. You're incredible. And I'll let you get back to your practice and to your son. But guys, if you want to listen to more of Dene's work, you can also find her podcast at Cheaper Than Therapy, which is such a good name for a podcast, by the way. Again, she's also on Instagram at Dene.Logan and on TikTok at Miss Interdependent.
Oh, thank you, Megan. Such a gift to meet you. Take care.
All right, guys, that's the end of the episode. I hope it helped someone out there. Next week, I have a really interesting episode. We delve further into dating and I interview my personal hinge matches. I'll be getting their insights on the ethics of dating multiple people. It is a controversial topic, I think, especially in Australia, more so than in a country like America, where I think dating a lot of people kind of is more accepted. But yeah, these guys sent in their voice notes with their honest perspectives on this topic, or at least as honest as any hinge match can be. But yeah, it's going to be really interesting. So stick around next week for that. And remember, if you'd like to have your say on anything I've discussed in this episode or on being self-care-ish in general, you can leave me a voice note anonymously if you like at selfcare-ish.com.au. Thanks, and I'll see you next Wednesday.